If you believe there's a magic sentence that makes a police officer sign defeat, hand back your license, and walk away in 30 seconds, I'm going to disappoint you right now. But stay with me, because there is a 4-word phrase that can dramatically change the direction of a traffic stop. Not in a viral, chest-puffing, gotcha way. Not in a way that humiliates an officer. And definitely not in a way that turns you into a courtroom legend on social media. It works for a completely different reason. Before I tell you what it is, I want to ask you something. Have you ever said something during a traffic stop that you later regretted, even though you thought you were being polite or helpful? Tell me in the comments what happened. Be honest, because most drivers don't get into trouble for what they did on the road. They get into trouble for what they said after the lights came on. And in a few minutes, you're going to understand exactly why 4 simple words can change the entire temperature of that encounter. Let's clear up the clickbait first. There is no phrase that police hate. Officers are not undone by secret codes. They are not shocked into submission by internet tricks. Traffic stops operate within legal frameworks, department policy, and officer discretion. That's the reality. But there is a phrase that protects you without escalating the situation. And it is this: I prefer not to. That's it. 4 words. Not aggressive, not theatrical, not defiant, not apologetic. Calm, controlled, measured. Now let's unpack why that works, because the power isn't in the words themselves, it's in what they represent. Most traffic stops follow a predictable structure. The officer approaches. They explain the reason for the stop. They ask for license, registration, proof of insurance. Then, at some point, they begin asking questions that are not strictly necessary to the purpose of the stop. Do you know why I pulled you over? Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Have you had anything to drink tonight? Is there anything illegal in the car? These questions feel casual. They often sound conversational. Sometimes they're friendly. Sometimes they're direct. Here's what most drivers don't understand. Once you start talking, you are building the officer's probable cause brick by brick. Let me explain how officers think during a stop, because this is the part nobody teaches in driver's education. An officer is constantly assessing risk and evidence. They are watching your hands, your breathing, your tone, your eye movement. They are evaluating whether this is a routine traffic violation or something bigger. When you answer questions casually, you may unintentionally provide admissions. I might have been going a little fast. That becomes acknowledgement of speeding. I'm just coming from a bar, but I only had one. Now alcohol is part of the equation. I'm in a hurry. That can support reckless driving arguments. You believe you are being cooperative. In many cases, you are creating leverage against yourself. This is where I prefer not to becomes powerful. If an officer asks, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" and you respond calmly, "I prefer not to answer any questions," you have just avoided admitting guilt. If they ask, "Where are you coming from tonight?" and you respond, "I prefer not to answer," you have avoided providing context that might expand the stop. Notice what you are not doing. You are not arguing. You are not invoking conspiracy theories. You are not refusing lawful orders. You are not saying you don't recognize the officer's authority. You are simply declining to provide voluntary statements. That distinction is everything. Now here's the part that people misunderstand, and this is important. You must still provide required documents. You must comply with lawful orders. If instructed to exit the vehicle, you generally must comply. If your state has a lawful requirement regarding identification during a stop, you must follow it. "I prefer not to" is not a shield against lawful commands. It is a boundary against self-incrimination. Some of you might be thinking, won't that make the officer suspicious? Possibly, but suspicion alone does not automatically grant authority to search or prolong the stop. Officers need reasonable suspicion or probable cause to expand the scope beyond the original reason. When you stay quiet respectfully, you remove fuel from the fire. Let me give you a realistic scenario. You're driving through a small town at night. You're slightly over the speed limit. The officer pulls you over. It's a minor speeding violation. The officer smells something faint. Maybe it's your cologne. Maybe it's something else. They ask, "Have you had anything to drink tonight?" If you say, "Just one beer with dinner," you've just provided admission of alcohol consumption. That admission allows the officer to investigate impairment further. Field sobriety tests become likely. A simple speeding stop becomes a DUI investigation. If instead you say calmly, "I prefer not to answer any questions," the officer must rely on actual observable indicators: slurred speech, bloodshot eyes, odor clearly consistent with alcohol, poor motor coordination. You didn't lie, you didn't escalate, you didn't confess. Now let's talk about tone, because this is where most people fail. If you say, "I prefer not to answer," with sarcasm, eye-rolling, or hostility, you've changed the emotional tone. Officers are human. Tone affects perception. But if you say it steadily, with eye contact, hands visible, no sudden movements, you project composure. Officers are trained to manage unknown risk. Calm drivers often signal lower threat levels. Aggressive drivers signal uncertainty. And here's something else you should know. Most officers expect some drivers to invoke their right to remain silent. It is not shocking. It is not rare. It does not automatically equal guilt. What officers do not expect is YouTube law school speeches at the roadside. You've seen those videos. Drivers refusing to roll down windows more than an inch, quoting obscure legal language, declaring they are not driving but travelling, demanding supervisors immediately. That approach almost always prolongs the stop. Let's be honest about something else. A traffic stop cannot legally last forever without justification. The Supreme Court has addressed this. The duration must be reasonably related to the purpose of the stop. Once that purpose is handled, prolonging the stop without new reasonable suspicion can violate constitutional protections. But if you are arguing, refusing basic compliance, or creating confusion, you are indirectly extending it yourself. The four-word phrase works because it shortens the conversation. It reduces material for follow-up questions. It narrows the interaction back to the alleged violation. Now I need to give you a warning. Silence is not immunity. If there is clear probable cause, the stop will proceed accordingly. If contraband is visible in plain view, declining to answer questions will not undo that. If you are visibly impaired, saying nothing will not erase physical evidence. This is not a cheat code that overrides reality. It is a risk management strategy. And risk management is what smart drivers focus on. Let's shift slightly because there's another layer most people overlook. Body language. Before you even speak, you are communicating. Engine off, window down, interior light on at night, hands on the steering wheel, slow movements, documents ready. These actions lower perceived threat levels. Officers approach every vehicle with uncertainty. They don't know if it's a parent late for work or someone with a warrant and a weapon. If you reduce uncertainty, you reduce tension. Combine that with, "I prefer not to answer any questions," and the stop often becomes procedural rather than investigative. Now let's talk about travellers, because this is where things get interesting. Out-of-state plates can attract more attention in certain areas. Rental cars sometimes receive closer scrutiny, especially near highways known for drug trafficking corridors. Officers are trained to look for behavioural indicators tied to criminal activity. Long pauses, overly rehearsed answers, inconsistent travel plans. You might think you're being friendly by explaining your entire trip itinerary. But inconsistencies, even minor ones, can create reasonable suspicion. "I prefer not to answer any questions" prevents you from accidentally contradicting yourself. Let me give you another scenario. You're driving cross-country. The officer asks, "Where are you headed?" You say, "I'm going to visit family." "Which family?" "My cousin." "What's his name?" Now you're in a conversation tree you didn't plan for. If you hesitate or fumble, it can look suspicious even if you've done nothing wrong. When you decline politely, the conversation narrows. Now here's the part most people never hear. Officers are also constrained by time and workload. They have calls pending, reports to complete, supervisors monitoring activity. If a stop remains straightforward and unremarkable, it often ends quickly because efficiency matters. Prolonged stops usually grow out of complications, admissions, inconsistencies, aggression, visible violations beyond the initial reason. By eliminating voluntary statements, you remove one major complication. I want to address one more misconception. Some people believe they must answer everything to avoid appearing guilty. Guilt is determined by evidence, not small talk. You are not legally required to solve the officer's curiosity. You are required to comply with lawful orders. There's a difference. Now imagine this in practice. Officer approaches. You greet them respectfully. You provide documents. You remain calm. You decline to answer investigative questions. The officer either writes the ticket or issues a warning. They return your documents. You leave. 30 seconds. Maybe not exactly, but often shorter than the spiraling conversations that trap many drivers. The phrase works because it is controlled restraint. It signals awareness without hostility. It protects your legal position without provoking confrontation. And here's something I want you to remember. The roadside is not the courtroom. You do not argue your case there. You do not debate the officer's interpretation. You do not present elaborate defenses. If you believe the ticket is incorrect, you can test it in court. The roadside is about safety and compliance. I've seen drivers turn minor infractions into major problems because they couldn't resist explaining themselves. I've seen simple warnings become citations after argumentative exchanges. I've also seen calm, quiet drivers receive warnings for violations that technically justified tickets. Discretion is influenced by attitude. The four-word phrase is not about defeating police. It's about managing your own exposure. And if you're thinking this sounds too simple, that's the point. The most effective strategies are rarely dramatic. Next time you see flashing lights in your rearview mirror, take a breath, slow down safely, prepare your documents, keep your movements visible, answer required questions. Decline voluntary ones calmly. You don't need a viral script, you don't need bravado, you need composure. Because the goal is not to win a roadside argument. The goal is to drive away with the least possible damage to your record, your wallet, and your future. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is simply that you prefer not to.